wanted to pick up on a theme that we started to hint at last time. And that theme is the theme of Derech Eretz Kadma LeTorah. I'll explain what that is in a second. One question that I think is on a lot of people's minds, and something that we really do need to answer, is just how narrowly defined is the Noahide relationship to Torah? Besides their 7 mitzvot, should they also look to Torah sources for ethical conduct and character traits? Or must they assume that the ethical teachings found in the Torah and in rabbinic literature do not apply to them? And in order to answer this question, let's look at a passage in the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah 9:3. It says the following thing. Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rav Nachman, said, Derech Eretz precedes Torah by 26 generations. As it is written, and to guard the way to the tree of life. The Medrash here is referencing the angels, the Malachei Kabbalah, who were stationed at the path to the tree of life after Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden. This is in Genesis chapter 3. And the verse says that God stationed those angels and the flame of the ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. This refers to Derech Eretz. Right? The tree of life is referring to the Torah. But the way to the tree of life is Derech Eretz. The term Derech Eretz means the way of the land, and it can refer either to ethical conduct or to work. A question can be asked, how can the world and its inhabitants have been morally sustained prior to God's giving commandments to human beings? Not only to the Torah, but for whatever length of time the world existed without the command of God. How did that happen? We know that there were 26 generations from Adam to Moses. How did they get along? What were the principles around which humanity revolved in its world, in the pre-Sinai world? According to Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was also known as the Alter of Slobodka, he lived from 1849 to 1927. This medrash that we just read has the answer to this question. The fabric of human society was held together through good character traits. And he says the following. He says, this is the intent of the rabbis. When we say Derech Eretz Kadma LeTorah, that Derech Eretz preceded the Torah by 26 generations, for all of the good character traits and attributes are included in Derech Eretz. This term is a catch-all term to refer to good character traits and attributes, personality attributes. They were ingrained in human nature, says the Alter of Slobodka, and for them, there is no need for the giving of the Torah. This comes out of his sefer, which is called Or HaTzafon. So essentially, what the Alter is saying is that virtues like honesty, integrity, and compassion were the basis upon which divine law would eventually be given. What we can learn from this is that principles that come from a higher source, such as the 7 mitzvot or the Torah, have to be built upon a foundation of goodness. It's not just divine law that matters, but the human being to whom it is given. In fact, without human beings, there's no real need for the divine law. But when we say human beings, we're talking about something very specific, not just a higher order primate, not just the supremely evolved creature of the earth. The human being needs to be a fitting recipient for Torah. In other words, he needs to be what we call in Yiddish a mensch. If a monkey doesn't eat the limb of a live animal or doesn't steal, it's lovely, but it's completely irrelevant. Only when it's human beings with their free will and desires will because they refine themselves as people. Those are the foundations. That person can become the vehicle for God's law. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was one of the greatest of the previous generation, commented on Genesis chapter 14, verse 14. And here we're talking about the episode of his nephew Lot, Abraham's nephew Lot, being captured. Rabbi Yaakov says that according to the laws of the Torah, Abraham would have been exempt from trying to rescue his nephew. Why? Because the Torah does not demand that someone put himself in potential danger in order to save someone else. And that's a principle that we know as chayecha kodem, meaning your life comes first. Abraham went to save Lot anyway because the patriarchs who lived before the giving of the Torah led their lives according to what Rabbi Yaakov calls the seichel hayashar. Now, this phrase means upright intellect. But what is this thing? Rabbi Yaakov explains that this is what is meant by the medrash that we read in the beginning when it refers to derech eretz, meaning that there is a natural inbuilt conscience in mankind that allows people to determine which actions are proper and which are not. And this was the path of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prior to the giving of the Torah. Now, once the Torah is given, human mores of derech eretz can be compared to Torah laws. And if there's a contradiction between them, between derech eretz and Torah law, the Torah would take precedence because of its divine origin. However, Rabbi Yaakov is telling us that our medrash is not pitting one against the other. It's simply giving us a chronological account of how humanity existed in the moral sphere over time. The conclusion is that even without the Torah, as the world was for 26 generations, humanity is guided by natural conscience and must have an ethical life. And this is especially an important point for Noahites, who, even if they are bound by fewer articulated laws, are still expected to elevate themselves to the grandeur of humanness, of what human beings can be. They are expected to refine themselves by the principles that are recognized by all human beings as honorable, because that's the way the world was before any of these laws were given. Meaning to say that when laws are given, that's not supposed to represent a de-evolution of humanity. That's supposed to represent a higher level for humanity. So the very fact that there was a world that existed according to a moral universe of derech eretz prior, even let's say, to the giving of the Sheva mitzvot, B'nei Noach, means that we still have a standard that precedes everything. Now, in Exodus chapter 4, verse 18, the verse states the following: Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me now go back to my brethren who are in Egypt and see if they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Very interesting interaction, because we know that prior to this event, Moses was commanded by God to return to Egypt and redeem Israel. How can he keep God waiting? But from his actions, it's clear that he sensed a moral imperative in being sensitive towards his father-in-law and honoring his familial obligations before embarking even on a divine mission. So we see here again a basic sense of what works, what is ecologically sound from a moral standpoint. We see Moses acting accordingly. And we have another example. There's an idea expressed by Chazal that the patriarchs kept the whole Torah even before it was given at Sinai. So, question is obvious. If so, how did Jacob marry two sisters? Since this is something that would become forbidden by the Torah. We have an answer to this question from the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. He said, before the Torah was given, the world was sustained through derech eretz. Jacob had promised Rachel that he would marry her. Unfortunately, we have B'nai Noach that did not act according to ethical conduct codes. Laban, who did not conduct himself this way, according to principles of derech eretz, tricked Jacob into marrying Leah. Now, in a post-Sinai world, Jacob would not be able to marry Rachel once he had married her sister. But in this case, he made an exception. Even though we have this idea that the patriarchs kept the whole Torah, here he makes an exception. He suspends Torah law. Why? Because Jacob had given Rachel his word. And the natural law of derech eretz demands that a person fulfill his obligations to others. Before the Torah was given, keeping one's word was the law in force. The prohibition against marrying two sisters would come later. Now, in Pirkei Avot, which is a series of Mishnayot, of Mishnah, which is really the first statement of Torah ethics outside the written Torah, we find the following statement. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, if there is no Torah, there's no derech eretz. If there's no derech eretz, there's no Torah. That comes from chapter 3, Mishnah 17. And we have a commentary from Rabbeinu Yonah on this Mishnah. He says the following. He says, without Torah, there's no derech eretz, meaning that one who doesn't know Torah is incomplete in character traits of derech eretz. Why? Because the majority of the good character traits about the ways of the world are in the Torah. For example, extending loans, severance pay, honest weights and measures, and many others like this. If so, without Torah, one's character traits cannot be complete with derech eretz, meaning with derech eretz alone. So here we might come to an answer as to, well, the whole world did conduct itself according to basic morality, basic conscience. So if a Noahide person would like to find some sort of a system for refining their own character traits, do they even need to look in the Torah? Why don't they read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius? Why don't they read any of the ethical tomes that have been written over the centuries? Without the Torah, derech eretz seems to be incomplete. So it could very well be that, the Torah does round up, it tops up that kind of basic ethical idea. But Rabbeinu Yonah is only explaining one side of the equation. He's explaining why, if there is no Torah, there's no derech eretz. Now we have to understand that if there is no derech eretz, there is no Torah. It works the other way as well. And so from here, from this Mishnah, we can see the inherent connection between the two things. The foundation for Torah is derech eretz. And while it is only the foundation, if there is no derech eretz, there is no Torah. There's nowhere to put it. At the very least, human beings must tune themselves into the basic moral principles of natural, conscience-based living. And we see just how essential derech eretz is. When we look at a passage in the Talmud in Tractate Eruvin, page 100b, Rabbi Yochanan said, had the Torah not been given, we would have learned to be modest from cats, to avoid theft from ants, to avoid promiscuity from doves, and proper marital relations from roosters. Meaning to say that all we have to do is look in the natural world and we will already be inspired towards good midot, towards good character traits. Now, commenting on this statement, Rabbeinu Nisim Gaon says in his introduction to the Talmud the following: for all precepts that are dependent on logic and intuition of the heart, and this is really the province for Noahites, this is really where they need to draw from, all the precepts that are dependent on logic and intuition of the heart are already binding upon all humanity from the day that God created man on the earth, upon man and his offspring for all future generations. All humanity includes all humanity. So we see how this is just inherent. In other words, it's almost like having a building that has two floors. The first floor supports the second floor. If you don't have the first floor, the second floor sort of floats in space and has no stability. Derech eretz, being a mensch, refining your character traits, being the best human being you can possibly be, is the base for Torah, whatever level of Torah you are bound by, be it Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach or the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. This is how we can understand that even though Noahites might not be obligated to observe the entirety of Jewish law, they are expected to adhere to ethical principles and moral conduct. And here's how this concept applies to Noahites. First of all, again, it's a foundation for ethical conduct. The idea that ethical conduct precedes the giving of the Torah implies that there are universal ethical principles ingrained in human nature. And what we're saying here cuts against the very pervasive moral relativism that we see in the world, but it's nevertheless true. These principles serve as the basis for a righteous and moral society even before the specific laws of the Torah were revealed. For Noahites, adherence to ethical behavior is fundamental to their spiritual path. Also, we saw in Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetzy's commentary the notion of seichel hayashar, or upright intellect, which suggests that human beings possess an innate moral compass, which guides them towards proper behavior. This conscience aids individuals in discerning between right and wrong, irrespective of whether they have explicit divine commandments. So Noahites obviously are expected to rely on this natural conscience to lead virtuous lives. Now, like any capability and like any muscle in the body, natural conscience has to be exercised. We have to develop our ability to tune into our natural endowed conscience in order for it to work like the moral antenna that it's supposed to be. Now, also, while Noahites might not be bound by the entirety of Torah law, they are encouraged to draw ethical guidance from Torah sources. Why not? Why would you have to ignore everything that Chazal say and just try to piece together some type of moral quilt based on everything else that you can find out there? It's not to say that there aren't incredible ideas that can be found in the writings and the teachings of all societies. In fact, Rabbi Hillel Zeitlin, Hashem Yikam Damov, wrote that anything that is excellent about humanity should be incorporated into a person's life. But why not look at the incredible wellspring of Torah and rabbinical literature that can serve as an invaluable resource for Noahides seeking to cultivate good character traits and ethical conduct? They might not be obligated to observe all the laws, but they can still derive wisdom and moral insights and inspiration from Torah teachings. Now, we also know that ethical living is a preparation for Torah. You have to start there. We see I don't want to write it off as just a cute little vart, but we see in the morning services in the Siddur, La'olam ye'eh Adam yirei shamayim, that a person should always strive to have fear of heaven. Some people just cut the sentence off after the first three words, which renders Le'olam ye'eh Adam, that at all times a person should strive to be an Adam, a mensch. Just as the patriarchs exemplified righteous living before the giving of the Torah, Noahides can aspire to live ethically in anticipation of further spiritual growth, embodying virtues like honesty, integrity, and compassion. Doing this, Noahides prepare themselves to receive and uphold divine teachings more fully should they choose to embrace Torah observance in the future. But even if they choose not to embrace Torah observance, we're talking about full Torah observance in the future, even if they choose to remain with the blessed Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, again, they of course are rationally compelling. They are logical laws. But we also know that they are God-given. And we have to remind ourselves of that basic structure of the refined human being serving as a vessel for what is then God-given. And the Talmudic statement about learning moral lessons from nature underscores the universality of certain moral imperatives. If you look around the world, we'll find that these principles are not exclusive to any particular religious tradition. They're just binding upon all of humanity. We know that because there are times when horrible atrocities are committed and unbelievable breaches of this basic moral code are done, and it gets our dander up. We are disgusted by it. For Noahides, what this does is it reinforces the idea that ethical behavior transcends religious boundaries, and it's incumbent upon all individuals. So even though Noahides might have a narrow set of religious obligations as compared to Jews, they're still expected to prioritize ethical conduct and character development. The concept of derech eretz kadma l'Torah, that derech eretz precedes the Torah, helps us to understand the basic importance of ethical living, and it serves as a guiding principle for Noahides on their spiritual journey.